Welcome to Faith Helps Podcast, and I am your host. If you didn't know already, it's your girl, Diamond Booth. And if you tuned in last week, thank you, sugar, thank you, and welcome back. And if this is your first time here, and this is the first episode you're hearing, welcome. You are in for a treat, darling. Okay. Now, real quick though. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I'm actually going to ask you to go back and listen to that, like ASAP. Before even continuing another second of this episode, because today's episode is an extension of last week's conversation, and without the full context, you may feel a little lost with the references I make. If you are just completely adamant about not going back and listening to episode 14, okay, here's the summary. Last week, I told you guys about a picture that had two cats sitting together, one striped cat that had caught a large mouse and a spotted cat that caught a very small mouse. Now, in last week's episode 14, it was titled The Thief of Your Joy. We focused on the spotted cat, the one that was allowing comparison to be the thief of its joy. But I want to go back and talk about the other cat, the striped one. The one that had the larger mouse and every reason to be joyful, proud, and celebratory, yet kind of seemed to choose the opposite. For the sake of this conversation, we'll call him Mr. Stripes. I know, so original. On one hand, we could say that the striped cat was just simply empathizing with the spotted cat, right? Sure, we could say that. And I don't particularly consider myself someone who overanalyzes things, but I do think deeply. So, the longer I stared at the photo, the more curious I became about our friend Mr. Stripes. I grew more and more curious about his feelings. And not in the typical, stereotypical way of saying, and how does that make you feel? As a therapist, I've learned to not just listen to what is being said, but to pay more attention to the nonverbals. So paying attention to how something is being said, what body language, facial expressions, and hand gestures is the person using? What tone of voice are they using? Is there inflection when they are saying certain words? Or maybe their legs are shaking, or they're fidgeting with their fingers and sleeves nonstop. Like, what is their posture saying that their mouth isn't or won't? Someone not used to paying attention to these sort of things might wonder, why does any of that even matter? Okay, hear me out. This is why it matters. It matters because in actuality, 55% of communication is body language. Just body language, that's over half. And then that's not even a half of it. 38% is voice and tone. That leaves only 7% of communication that is comprised of spoken words and content. 7% is spoken words and the content. So body language speaks. Not only does it speak, it does most of the speaking. And this is why I couldn't just ignore our friend Mr. Stripes. Though no words were being verbally spoken, his body language was giving an entire TED talk. His sharp frown dragged the hope from his surprised eyes, as if to say, wipe this smile off your face. You have no right to feel proud of yourself. His ears, which I imagined were typically perked with alertness, which is probably how he ended up catching the larger mouse in the first place, hung themselves with a little less perk and quite a bit more uncertainty as they turned themselves outward from any potential of praise or celebration. It was almost as if even his ears knew that hearing a genuine "congrats, Mr. Stripes" was beyond unlikely, let alone definitely not coming from the spotted cat. All of these nonverbal cues tell me that Mr. Stripes wasn't feeling as proud, joyful, or celebratory as he could have, as he should have, because he had every right to feel proud, joyful, and every right to celebrate his achievement. Certainly, there are times when it may be a little more appropriate to withhold our showboating and excessive enthusiasm about our achievements. But I also want to acknowledge that we can hold the tension of both. I'm not saying when someone's grieving a loss that you go rub something in their face and completely dismiss their grief. No. What holding the tension of both emotions looks like is we grieve with those who grieve, and we also are able to be celebratory about our own achievements, and others can celebrate with us. That's something that I've appreciated so much, how a podcaster / pastor / extraordinary person in every single way and author, go get his book, Tim Ross is who I'm talking about. I know you guys have heard me mention him several times, but he talks about this as well, is holding the tension of sadness and grief, as well as happiness, joy, or celebration. Both can exist in the same space. For example, if this is really hard to visualize, I want you to imagine that your bestest friend ever is about to get married, right? And they're moving to their dream state with their new husband, right? Yay! Celebration! He or she is getting married, and they get to finally get to their dream state that they've constantly been talking about moving to, and they've told me over decades of how long they've been longing to move there, and now finally they're there, and you remember standing in prayer with them about getting married, and now they're finally getting married to someone wonderful. You are ecstatic and excited for them, and you may also experience some sadness and some forms of grief, because with this move and this marriage means that there will also be some changes in your friendship dynamics that can bring sadness. And in that exact example, we can see how there can be this tension of holding both and also coexisting with joy and positive emotions, as well as the unpleasant emotions that we may not want to experience. Both are present in that situation. Likewise, when we are with someone who is sad about something that they didn't accomplish, that doesn't mean that we have to hide our accomplishment. It doesn't mean that we have to belittle or minimize what we accomplished. We can grieve, validate their sadness or their disappointment. We can share in that space, that emotional space with them, and be, a source of support. And we can also acknowledge our accomplishment with them. And in healthy, mature relationships, we know how to do that. We're able to learn and practice, and it does take practice, mastering holding the tension of both, the positive and not so positive. And a healthy, mature friend would be able to celebrate with you as well. just as you would be able to grieve with them as well. You know, staring at this picture of Mr. Stripes, I wondered if he felt like he had to hide his joy and excitement. I wondered if in that moment he was thinking, I should have never even shown him my mouse. I wondered if he blamed himself for the other cat's sadness and shame. Even though I'm making what might seem like lofty assumptions about a random picture of cats I found on the internet, I don't think my hypothetical assumptions are all that hypothetical for us in real life. I think they are closer to reality than we may want to admit, because if we're honest, there have been times in our lives when we could have easily inserted ourselves into this exact situation. Maybe for you is, I should have never even shown him my new watch or car. Or maybe for you it was, oh man, I should have never even told her about my promotion. Unfortunately, we live in a day and age where people are quick to be jealous and resentful and resistant to sharing in triumph. People will come to your graduation party to spectate, I meant celebrate your big achievement. But plant themselves in one spot the whole night, holding up the wall while they critique the decorations and make comparisons between your graduation venue and theirs that they hosted over 5-10 years ago. They'll show up to quote unquote celebrate you at your wedding, but spend the whole time complaining about appetizers that they didn't pitch in a dime to pay for. I remember I was talking with a good friend of mine about their new car, and I knew they were super excited about it. Oh man, so excited. But when they finally pulled up so I could see it, I peeped that they were sort of downplaying their own excitement. Today, I would say that they were looking a little bit like Mr. Stripes. They didn't even bother to pop the hood or anything. For my car enthusiast friends, y'all know that's one of the first things we show off on any sports or muscle car. Well, come to find out, before they came to show me the car, they stopped past their uncle's house, whom they thought was going to be super happy for them. Instead, the uncle shrugged his shoulders, made a snide remark about, you must think you're all that now, and told him good luck not being or getting into debt trying to keep it. I empathized greatly with my friend because it broke my heart to see their joy just taken away. I knew how much they sacrificed to get the car, the extra shifts they picked up at work when they were already working full-time, the additional part-time job they found a way to maintain somehow, I don't even know. I saw the self-control they practiced with their finances for over 3 entire years, building up their credit and savings account. I knew the self-discipline it took them to be intentional and wise about how they budgeted and spent their money, making conscious decisions to eat leftovers instead of Chick-fil-A or Bojangles. Their uncle didn't get to see any of that. He didn't think about the work my friend had put into getting that car and the sacrifices he made. What was later revealed through the family grapevine was that back in the day, the uncle used to have the same car and loved it. But it got repoed because he couldn't afford to keep it while also maintaining his lavish turn-ups at local clubs every weekend and being reckless with his spending. In other words, he wasn't self-disciplined and didn't practice self-control with his finances, unlike my friend. I'm sure my friend isn't the only person to have an experience like this. One minute, you're super thrilled about your big achievement or accomplishment, but then as soon as you get around the wrong company, your joy gets watered down. Your smile turns into a solemn frown. You minimize the success you've made for the sake of others. And I say wrong company intentionally, because when you are around the right people, people who are healthy and mature, people who are really for you and not against you and not shackled to comparison or their own insecurities, people who are able to share in your joy regardless of what insecurities or regrets it's bringing up for them. When you are around people who see the hard work you put into a goal and they respect it and they commend it, then you don't feel pressured to suppress your joy or pride in your success. In the company of the right people, you will feel celebrated in your accomplishments and encouraged and comforted in your trials or lessons. I don't say failures because I do believe everything happens for a reason, and I also believe every failure is either an opportunity to learn and grow, or it's a redirection to something better. I could say a whole lot more on that, but we'll save that for another episode. Right now, I just want you to focus on how you celebrate your achievements and who you share them with. Like, really take a moment to think about it, whether past or currently. Do you have people around you who are genuinely excited for you and what you accomplish? When you share your success, do they cheer for you? Do you hear their compliments and their excitement, or do they greet you with negative vibes, criticism, and snide remarks? Do they get caught up in comparison, or do they relish in your excitement? Can they appreciate the hard work, sacrifice, and effort, and blood, and sweat, and tears you've put into something, or do they belittle it with sarcasm and contrast your journey with theirs? It's so important for us to take inventory about who we have in our space and who we give permission to speak into our lives, whether regarding accomplishments, trials, or lessons. Let me tell you something. I know the movies and little Lifetime shows normalize jealousy or animosity when it comes to comparing success, but that is not something that should be normal in a healthy relationship of any kind, whether friend, fam, or spouse. You should not feel like you have to mute your excitement or suppress your joy because you don't want to offend or make someone else uncomfortable. You shouldn't feel like you have to walk around with a frown or your head hung low just because it makes their grief more tolerable for them or their disappointment more easy to swallow, as opposed to confronting it and being able to still celebrate with you just as much as you would with them. Sometimes we do this preemptively. We, assuming they wouldn't share in our joy, we don't even give them the opportunity to show us how they would respond. We try to beat them to the punch in anticipation of how they're going to feel, so we downplay and minimize ourselves before they get a chance to do it. Unconsciously, we rationalize, if we say it to ourselves, then it won't sting as bad. It's It's not always a conscious decision. For many of us, it's habitual. And we don't just do this in the area of our success and achievements. Earlier, I gave the example of someone being jealous at a wedding, but that example is so real. Comparison does not restrict itself to success relating to careers, jobs, or finances. Comparison is the thief of joy, period. It doesn't matter what type of joy. An example my ladies in particular might resonate with is how we have this trending culture with man bashing. All men are dogs, all men cheat, blah, blah, blah. If we are surrounded by people who have that type of mentality, we learn pretty quickly to beat them to the punch and suppress our own joy about healthy, flourishing, monogamous, blessed, and highly favored relationships. And God forbid something does go wrong in the relationship, which is normal. Every relationship has its ups and downs. That's why we say it in our wedding vows. When that happens, we feel like we definitely have to hide that, or whatever the argument was, because it'll just give them more ammo to man bash even more. Followed by an unrequested, "Oh girl, I told you so." Men ain't, you fill in the blank. What I've seen these patterns lead to time and time again in my work as a therapist is people isolating themselves, withdrawing from community and friends, suppressing emotions, stuffing their problems, and not having opportunities to process and work through them in a healthy, adaptive, supportive, and safe environment where they don't have to fear being judged or have to worry about how everyone else is going to feel. They can just focus on getting their need met in that moment, which is often just comfort, validation, encouragement, reassurance, and a little support. I remember years ago, I was so excited about something my boyfriend at the time had done for me. It made me feel so seen, so special. So the next day, when I went out with one of my former homegirls, I knew I wanted to tell her about it because to me, it was sweet and endearing. But I also knew this was the same friend whose lifelong motto, as long as I have ever known her, was "Niggas ain't sugar, honey, iced tea." A part of me hoped, really hoped and thought that just maybe this one time she'll see my genuine joy and see how much it made me smile and would celebrate with me, or at least set her biases aside long enough to act happy for me. But as you can probably guess, unfortunately I was wrong. And she responded as I expected, and I instantly regretted sharing it in the first place. I eventually had to accept that regardless of all her other wonderful characteristics, yes, she had other characteristics that made her a beautiful and wonderful person, which is why we were close. Not everyone who has a bad trait is a bad person. However, it may mean that depending on where you are in your own journey, they may or may not be someone who can go with you in the next level of your journey. Or maybe there are some boundaries you just are going to have to set in place if they are. Maybe there are certain things you can't talk with them about because, one, you're protecting your joy, your mind, and your mental health, your wellness, your happiness about your relationship, and you don't want to give someone your ear if they're just going to pour poison into it because their trauma is speaking louder than their awareness of your current present joy. please understand now what I didn't understand then. Sometimes people are just regurgitating what they've ingested. In other words, people often reproduce what was put in them. In psychology, we call it being a product of one's environment or experiences. My friend, as ambitious, clever, talented, generous, and funny as she was, she had also been through a lot in her relationships with men throughout her entire life. A lot. So much unhealed hurt, unreconciled differences, and a lot of trauma. And the collection of those experiences produced her motto. It produced her resentment and her bitterness. It produced a side of her that I knew deep down inside wasn't really her. It wasn't who God created her to be. I also knew that only real healing and confronting the hurt and pain would help. She wasn't ready to do that. On the other hand, sometimes we do encounter certain people who are just always fixated on comparison, like everything is a competition, or they're driven by jealousy and envy. Culture calls them haters, but not all haters are obvious. Sometimes, quote unquote, haters dress their jealousy and envy up in love or wisdom. They preface their criticism with, "I'm only telling you this because I love you." Or after making a negative, pessimistic, downgrading, belittling remark, they finish it with, "Look, I'm just trying to look out for you, bro." So what do we do? What do we do about this conundrum so that we don't just cut everybody off? Because that's also not a healthy solution. We don't want to cut everybody off and run away to a remote island to live in solitude for the rest of our lives. That's not the solution. And I may not have an exact answer, but I would like to just offer you 3 tips that you can start implementing this week and moving forward that can help. Number 1, establish clear and healthy boundaries for yourself and practice maintaining them in your relationships. If you do not have a clear understanding of what healthy boundaries are, or simply want to learn more about them, you can easily just Google them on therapistsA.com. That is a great resource, and it's free for anyone. There's a lot of self-help resources there. You can also visit my website that I've pinged a couple of times, faithhelpsllc.com. You can go to the resource page and read the PDF on boundaries. Maintaining boundaries is actually often the most challenging part, because wherever a boundary is set, there will be resistance on the other side. This is because you are disrupting what used to be considered a norm or acceptable. You're changing the rhythm. I tell my clients all the time, setting a boundary is just like telling a child no. The first time you tell them no, they are probably going to try to ignore or disregard you. And sometimes that is just out of habit from being used to being told yes. But when you reassert that no, they're often going to throw a fit, try to push back, have a tantrum, cry, scream, do whatever they got to do to get you to change your mind. And if you give in, then you just taught them that, oh, okay, if I just throw a tantrum, scream, cry, up the ante, then they'll give me my way. But if you stand firm in that boundary and maintain it, eventually they fall in line or fall off. And in that case, they weren't meant to be in your life in the first place. To clarify, I'm not talking about your child. I'm bringing it back to the point of setting boundaries in your relationships. If the person is not respecting that boundary and they see that you're going to hold to your guns and stick to it, either they eventually give in and fall in line, or they fall off. Or that means that they weren't meant to be in your life in the first place, and that is okay, even though it'll hurt. It can also mean that they weren't meant to go with you in the next phase of your journey, which can also hurt. This is what it looks like to hold the tension of both. Setting a boundary and honoring and respecting yourself, and grieving the loss of a relationship because they wouldn't respect the boundary as well. But it is so important to practice maintaining the boundary until it becomes a habit. Remember, a boundary is not a boundary if there is no consequence. It's just a request. So if your boundary is that you're going to hang up the phone if they're bad-mouthing other people, and you've told them that you don't want to, then when they start bad-mouthing other people, hang up the phone. You have to show that you will follow through with your boundaries. Number 2, take a close look at your closest friendships and relationships. Those closest to you often have the biggest impact and influence on you because they have your ear, they have your time, and they have your attention. Those are some valuable things that you don't want to give just anybody access to. What fruits are they producing in your life? And by fruit, I mean effects, results, rewards, or consequences. Is the relationship, for example, resulting in you being more diligent and focused and having more self-control in your goals or in your life? Or is it resulting in you prolonging the goals you've set in the exchange for temporary fulfillment and clubbing every weekend? Also ask yourself, after hanging out with them, do you feel the effects of their positivity and feel uplifted or motivated, inspired and affirmed and validated? Or do you feel the effects of their complacency and feel drained and feel discouraged and feel minimized and unheard and undervalued? Look at who has your ear. Look who's closest to you. Number 3, do your own self-assessment. Sometimes we are way too quick to blame those around us for what we ourselves are manifesting in our own lives. Take some accountability. Do you have a tendency to be pessimistic or self-deprecating? We often teach people how to treat us. So if we are constantly being pessimistic and self-deprecating, we are sending a message to others that it is okay to do that around us and to us. We are teaching them how to interact and engage with us. As I said, sometimes we develop the unconscious habit of beating people to the punch by minimizing our own achievements. Well, depending on how long you've been doing that, you may have made it a habit, and you may be bringing that old toxic habit into new healthy relationships. It doesn't matter how healthy or positive the people around you are if you're still toting along bad habits from the past relationships. As a bonus tip, I want you to consider this. If you needed to move from one house to the other, but you had all this extra baggage that's weighing you down, when you get to that new house, and you're trying to bring all that baggage with you, all that pain, all that negativity with you, you're just going to recreate it in that fresh new home. What is it that you need to let go? What is it that you need to maybe do your own self-assessment with and fine-tune and clear out and let go of, whether in therapy or just in self-discovery through journaling and taking time to meditate or taking time to really analyze what characteristics you want to change and improve for yourself, not for anyone else, but for yourself first. And last but not least, ask God. Ask him. Seek him. Invite him into your decisions, into your questions. We pray about a husband or a wife till we turn blue in the face, but whole time before you ever even meet a spouse, you have dozens of other relationships in your life prior to them. Family, friends, mentors, colleagues, associates, the list could go on. We should be bringing those relationships to God just as much. And those who are closest to you, those who have your ear. So ask God to give you wisdom and discernment about who you share certain things with and what you share. Seek guidance on who should or should not have access to your ears. In other words, ask for guidance on who and who should not have access to your mind and your heart. Maybe there are some people in your life right now that you've given permission to speak into your life, but their permission needs to be revoked. Ask God to reveal them, expose them, remove them. And also, if you feel led to let go and remove them, you have to be willing and have the obedience to do so, the courage to do so. And it's okay if it hurts in the process. Grieve it. It won't always be easy. Doing this thing called life is not easy. So give yourself some grace. I know that this may have felt like a heavy or very intense conversation or podcast. I want to encourage, empower, inspire you to take some time to, number one, reflect. Ask yourself the questions that I've shared with you about, assessing yourself and those who have your ears, aka your heart and your mind. And really being honest with what comes up for you and acknowledging it. And after that, I want to also encourage you to take time to love on you. Give yourself a nice, relaxing day. Self-care, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe it looks like a spa day. Maybe for you it looks like just sitting outside for a few minutes and enjoying the fresh air, the sun, nature, grounding yourself, which just means to center yourself. Or maybe it looks like requesting that day off that you've been contemplating for the last 3 weeks. Whatever self-care needs to look like for you, I encourage you to do that this week and this weekend. And until next time, my loves, if nothing else, take care of yourself, love on yourself, set boundaries, and stick with them. And remember, faith helps.